Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and or good night, depending on where you are in the world, and thank you for taking part in this tutorial series on Roll20, how to make my first dungeon. This is episode 2 in our series, and in the first episode, we looked at setting up your page, setting up the sort of back end things. Before we actually get to the nitty gritty of actually drawing out your dungeon, we're going to look at themes and other things that you might need to consider before actually putting pen to paper and creating your very first dungeon on screen. Pick a theme. For this theme, we're going to go with a very little known fantasy oriented RP trope, which is a dragon in a dungeon. But anyway, we're probably going to go with a red dragon, which means we need to then consider what would a red dragon have around as its own minions, its supporting cast of characters, if you like, that the players are going to encounter when progressing through your dungeon. The likelihood is it's probably going to be kobolds, drakes, dragonborn or half dragons, perhaps some cultists in there, who knows. But what sort of minions do you think your big bad is going to have? Think about the smaller versions of those and things that you can use to help create that feel of, you know, the big bad has his own minions and you have to get through the minions to get to the big boss fight at the end. Other things to consider is the layout. Do you want just one big battle royale? So if so, then all you need to do is create one big open area with some terrain in the way, some obstacles and things like that. You could have your big thematic battle, which will make for a very straightforward and simple dungeon. Or are you looking more for a dungeon crawl? You know, your adventurers sneak under a waterfall and find themselves in a slightly damp cave, although the temperature's really warm. Wait, there's lava further in. You can smell sulfur in the air. You know, you're progressing through this environment that this red dragon would have created for its home and its minions. Perhaps you were captured and you start your players off in a prison cell, in which case they need to escape and then they need to go and break out and take on the guard. So you need to consider a prison, a guard room, you need to consider lava, you need to consider waterfalls, you need to consider mossy rocks where the spray's coming, you know, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and the detail and things like that. If you're in a cave, then you're going to look at stalagmites, stalactites, things like that, just to add more detail so that you know, you can create the best map possible. Other things you should probably consider are, is it a one-shot map? Is it a campaign map? If it's a one-shot map, then you're looking at roughly 3 hours of gameplay, depending on your group and depending on you know, how big your one-shot is. Average it out for me is usually about a 3-hour one-shot. Now, usually that boils down to about, you know, an encounter or a room or something like that. Every hour session, you know, they can progress through that. Now, that could be an encounter. When I say an encounter, it could be a combat situation, it could be a puzzle situation, it could be a social encounter. You know, there could be situations where they get trapped and they need to puzzle their way out of it, or they need to bribe people, or, you know, there's all sorts of things. But roughly plan it out so that you have one major event happening in each of your hour chunks, obviously leading up to the final chunk where they get an hour in combat with the final boss. Trust me, it will take that long. Whereas if it's a campaign, then you need to consider that the map that you're making is part of the whole rather than just an isolated incident, meaning that there might need to be tie-ins to previous maps, or, you know, plot hooks that you need to include for going forward so that the players have things to pick up on. There may be NPC characters that they've come across elsewhere that are trapped here and they need to rescue them. Who knows, but certainly consider that when you're mapping versus a one-shot. It's a slight consideration, but it's certainly an important one. And last but not least, work out what your end boss or your goal is for this particular map first and start there. So in this particular example, which we're going to be working through, I've picked a red dragon as our big bad boss at the end of the dungeon, which means it's probably going to be in a warm environment. Maybe it's in a volcano, something along those lines. So I need to consider that it's going to have lava in there. It's obviously going to be in a dungeon, so perhaps I need to have some obsidian rocks in there. Stalagmites, as I've said, stalactites, that's also consideration. Then you think about its minions. So what you can do is you can stagger back. So a red dragon is going to have fire breath. It's going to be able to fly. You know, you want to foreshadow these things earlier in the dungeon. So you could have a group of kobolds. If you've got enough kobolds in that group, then one of them's going to be a winged kobold, and therefore it's going to be dropping from the skies, giving the consideration that, hey, maybe they need to think about something other than just what's immediate in front of them, because it could be above them. You know, there could be other things as well. If you throw in some Dragonborn in there, they can obviously have a breath attack as well. If they're red Dragonborn, then there's a fire breath attack. Therefore, you're tying it in with the fact that they need to think, oh yeah, be aware that some things around here breathe fire. And there you've sort of foreshadowed the fact that you have creatures that fly, you have creatures that breathe fire, and by the end of the dungeon, you've already foreshadowed like 2 of the things that are key to your big bad boss at the very end. That should hopefully wrap that up, and thank you very much for watching this video. Please stick around for the next one, where we're going to get stuck into the real detail part of the map making. As always, I'm ZangMac, and take it easy, guys. And if it's easy, take it twice. In a dungeon. Goddamn phone, motherfuck. So seriously consider these things. Goddamn phone!